7:03 right now. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Housing is a Human Right. My name is Savina Martin. I serve as one of the tri-chairs of the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign, as well as serve on the National Clergy Council with the Union of the Homeless. And I will be your moderator this evening. Everyone, please mute. Let us begin by opening up this sacred space to acknowledge, respect, and honor the Massachusetts land we are on, the descendants of the original people that the English invaders first encountered in what is now the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Like our indigenous families, the Poor People's Campaign, in keeping with the tradition of storytelling, have gathered over the years stories, faces, facts, fixes, and figures. We cannot talk about housing and homelessness without talking about systemic racism and poverty. Tonight, we will hear from 5 phenomenal organizers and social justice policymakers who will bring us closer to their work on the ground, connecting the 5 interlocking themes of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and a distorted moral narrative that keeps these systemic injustices intact. Our panelists will share how they have been impacted over the last year, what they are up against and up to now, and what are the struggles that they are facing and we are facing. And lastly, how can we all continue to support each other and build in the days and months ahead? What is the temperature of our state's renters? And what does the potential of evictions look like? What prescription is needed to continue to build power among our poor and low wealth communities? Shift the narrative and change policy and influence elections. We know that when you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. And what do we need in order to strengthen and build together a fusion movement in Massachusetts where everybody is in and nobody is out? So how do we build and join, for example, the National Union of the Homeless? And where do folks go to get the information that they need? From the lawmakers, from the organizers, and from those that are most impacted. We'll hear from folks tonight that will give us that information we need. And while folks are homeless but not helpless, we have to make sure that they join in this struggle to fight poverty and not the poor. How do we continue building this organism of allies, faith communities, support, and partners that are fighting against one paycheck or one illness away from eviction, healthcare, and homelessness? So let us listen, learn, and build. Our chat manager tonight is Vaughn Allen Goodwin, a tri-chair of the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign, and Cynthia Parker, who's on our communications coordinating team. She is our timekeeper. Each panelist will have 5 minutes to present, and Cynthia will gently chime in to alert you of the seconds left. Hey, Cynthia, do you want to chime and let them know what it sounds like? Thank you.
We'll do that when we have a minute left, and then we'll do it one more time when it's just about time to wrap up your last sentence.
Thank you, Cynthia. From 7:30 to about 7:35, we will pause for questions and answers from our chat manager, Vaughn Allen Goodwin. From there, and he's waving to everybody, from there we will resume with the remaining 2 panelists. And again, another break for questions and answers. And lastly, a call to action. Our first 3 presenters are Annie Goodwin, Rose Webster-Smith, and Ronel Remy. Are they here? We'll begin with Annie Gordon. Annie is a leader of a tenant association in a 347 unit complex in Boston. She's lived there for over 40 years and has organized against unfair rent increases, especially occurring after new public transportation was established in the neighborhood. She's seeking to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement with owners. Annie, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Annie Gordon. I am a member of the Fairlawn Tenants Association, a member of City Life Vida Urbana, and I'm one of the tenant leaders here at Fairlawn, and I've lived here for 45 years. There are many families here in this community that have been here just as long as I have. And in 2018, Fairlawn was sold to an outsider and renamed Soma Apatee. They came here to extract resources from the community benefits because of a commuter rail station that this community fought for over 20 years. And they've increased the rent so high that so many families have ran out of Fairlawn. They are displacing families and causing homelessness. The community's work and sweat equity for something that would make our lives easier is becoming the one thing that is pushing us out of our homes and our community. But with the help of City Life Vida Urbana, we organized and became a tenants association. And we are actively working together as a tenants association, and we are informing every tenant and everyone that as tenants, you do have rights and you can stand up and fight for your rights, and you can speak up for your rights, and you can fight to stay in your home. And what I didn't realize when this all started is that when I got a high rental increase, that City Life was already working in my community. And that made it that much easier. And being a part of the Tenants Association and helping others is a good part of it. And working with City Life, their sword and their shield is helping us to fight our battle, with their sword being public protest on big corporations and banks, and the shield being their legal assistance that helps us also. So we are fighting for our rights. And as we fight at the present, we are fighting hopefully to get lower rental increases because everybody's gotten high rent increases. We're fighting now to get lower rent increases and to get longer contracts to stay in our home, in our homes. And the bottom line is that we will continue to fight for this, and we will fight for this and nothing less than this. And we feel like that if we fight together, we can win. And we all believe that housing is a human right for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. Our next panelist is Rose Webster-Smith of Springfield, No One Leaves. Rose Webster-Smith joined Springfield, No One Leaves in October of 2011, when Freddie Mac foreclosed on her family's home. Rose helped to organize the Fannie Freddie Fighters and organize planned actions in Springfield, Massachusetts, New York City, Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. We will let her share the victory and her fight that she's engaged in today. Welcome, Rose Webster-Smith.
Yes. So I joined Springfield No One Leaves as a member in 2011. I fought an eviction for 6 years and won my house back in March of 2017. It was a very, very long fight. And that same year, Springfield No One Leaves we transferred our entire leadership into a fully member-led entity. So everybody who is on our staff has been through eviction, foreclosure, displacement, or gentrification. Everybody who sits on our board is a member leader who goes through our political education school. It's a two-tier school that teaches about the movement and how it's the movement that makes change. It's the movement that, you know, brought about the end to racial covenants on deeds. It's the movement, it's the people power, and just like city life, we use the sword and the shield model. You know, we learned from them and brought it to Springfield in 2010. We still organize homeowners, and we also organize tenants. So we build power between homeowners and tenants, and we're working on writing the Springfield homeowner tenant Bill of Rights on housing. Just like Annie said, housing should be a human right and not for profit. So right now we are outreaching to all of Western Mass. Western Mass has 4 counties, and we are the only organization whose sole focus is on housing and economic justice. So we are outreaching to the many people who are facing eviction, organizing them, bringing them in to the movement, as well as the homeowners that are facing foreclosure. So many people think that just because there's federal protections that homeowners are not losing their homes. They absolutely are. There's over 1,500 homeowners in Massachusetts that are in danger of being foreclosed on right now. So we are working as, you know, Homes for All Massachusetts. Springfield No One Leaves is the co-anchor. So City Life is one of our longtime partners, and we are fighting for housing to be a human right, and we will continue to build power between homeowners and tenants across the state as we move to seed the dead spots to win real rent control in the state of Massachusetts.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you so much. Our next speaker, hello, okay. Our next speaker is Ronel Remy, the very powerful community organizer with City Life Vida Urbana. He's a longtime organizer and a seasoned activist through grassroots organizing and empowerment. I can't say enough about you, Ronel. Welcome, and we are very glad to have you here tonight.
Thank you, my sister Savina. Thank you, everybody. So nice to be here with you. I'm very humbled just to be with such a community of fighters, of folks who are determined to see a change in our communities, you know. And actually, I'm supposed to tell you what City Life does, and it's true. City Life, we've been fighting since 1973. We've been defending a community of folks who are marginalized, folks who are forced to live in conditions that are basically inhumane. In many places, we see animals getting better treatment than the folks that we basically represent. And also the folks that we serve have that complex. A lot of them are ashamed to admit what's being done to them. A lot of them are afraid actually to fight. They often turn and run. But when we come with City Life, not only we help them stay home, we organize them, and we do teaching with them. We use something called the 5 C's, so which is mass outreach, mass education, mass casework, mass canvassing. We have a system to make sure they stay plugged in the fight, that they don't feel alone, because the system works so well against us when we feel like we are alone, when we feel there is nothing else we can do. And what I wanted to say earlier is that those folks that we represent for generations, you know, have to live in basically what is necessary. They've learned to live with basically nothing, and with the hope that something will change, someone will come along. But somebody never comes. That someone is missing time and time again. So right now, it is up to us, you know, to make sure the system, you know, of mass destruction, the system of mass oppression come to an end. And each one of us has the responsibility to do something about it. When I hear Miss Annie speak about what's going on in our community, and just understanding what next door, a big conglomerate company bought Morton's village, who share the part of the train station that Miss Annie talked earlier about. And these people, they were getting evicted because of the success of their neighborhood. They fought for that train station to come by. And because of the money coming in, they were not good enough to remain in the neighborhood. But through City Life Work, through the fight of our organizers and the folks that live there, we were able to fight and to find a 5 years contract, a new lease at 3% that these folks can actually afford. And we feel many other communities can do that. But we also agree that our city, our state, is run in such a way, those who have big, deep pocket, they could use our communities as the ATM. Every time they need to withdraw funds, they come and get it out. And some other funds they're taking out are on values, the values that housing is human rights, and this is not good, and we need to put a stop to it. And the faith community should lead this fight. I am somebody of faith, and I believe there is another way to do things. And I want to join anybody who wants to do something different. I'm with you until I can go no more. Thank you, everybody, for having me. If there is any more question at the end, I will be happy to try to answer some of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ronel. And we are moving into the questions and answers for this period. But first, I want to stop it and welcome everybody who is tuned in tonight. We are really grateful that you're a part of the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revivals. Housing is a human right forum. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights document defines what the rights are of every human being: the right to a decent standard of living, the right to be protected from harm, the right to be cared for if injured or sick, the right to be fairly paid for work done, the right to rest. Section 26 of this document contends that states must also take action to ensure that all citizens enjoy an adequate standard of living. It recognizes food, clothing, housing, healthcare, and social services as essential components of a standard of living adequate for health and well-being. Housing as a human right. And now I will turn this section over to Vaughn Allen Goodwin, Tri-Chair of the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign.
Hello, everyone. Delighted to have everyone here. What we're going to do in order to take questions, if you have questions that you would like to have answered, I would ask that you raise the questions. We have 3 great speakers tonight. So you put your question in the chat. If it's directed to Annie or to Rose or to Ronel, just give the name, or if it's a question in general, that would be very helpful. And we will direct the questions to them at this time. Do any of you have any questions that you would like to raise? Any questions? You can put them in the chat now. Any questions?
I'm not going to write it. It'll take me too long. I have a question for all 3,
Okay.
please.
Okay, go ahead, Judy.
Thank you, Vaughn. I'd like to start with Annie and then Rose and Ronel, please. Have you found in your work that the tenants' rights really don't have a lot of teeth in them here in Massachusetts? I came up from Connecticut, and I'm kind of surprised at some of the laws, like you got until the 5th of the month. In Connecticut, it's definitely 10th of the month. I find that really, for working families, really tough. So have you found that tenants' rights absolutely need to be improved here in Massachusetts?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part? Tenants' rights, what?
generally, just have you, in your experience, have you found that there really needs to be a lot more teeth in the tenants' rights laws, and that in Massachusetts, it seems to really benefit landlords?
Yes, I really do, because first of all, for tenants' rights and for tenants to be treated fair, we need some kind of cap on the rents, or even most preferably rent control. We need that back. So yes, at this time, I think everything do kind of favor the landlords. And I think that's a little unfair to tenants. And yes, we do need something better. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, question. Thank you for, does anybody else want to take that question before we move on to others?
I think Annie nailed it.
Oh. Okay, all right. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Appreciate you. This is a question for
I could
Rose.
ask
Have you
something-
found,
Go ahead, Van Guy.
I'm sorry?
No,
Okay,
I
this
was-
is a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Remy. You want to answer that question? Ronel?
Actually, I just wanted to make an observation. I agree with that's a good question. So, but something that we should understand in Massachusetts, and although sometimes we don't like to say it, but there's certain colors that don't require protection. And I'm not using race there. You know, I'm just saying, unless you have green, you don't get the protection, even when you deserve it. So, having said that, think about how the law works, how those who police you work is for profit. Everything is commodified. If you can't pay, basically they don't think you should be living, you know. So I'll leave that there. I don't want to go too far.
Okay, the next question here says, what are the examples of SWORD actions, public protests? How do they work? This is a question to all three of you. In other words, what type of actions do you take in order to make things happen? You know, what are examples of SWORD actions, public protests? How do they work? What do you use? All right. Question to all three. Let's start from Rose Webster-Smith.
So we use a multitude of different tactics, from candlelight vigils to marches, right up to eviction blockades, where we will go in and we will blockade for, you know, and make sure that, and do our darndest to keep the sheriff or the constable from moving you out. And we will risk arrest, and we will go to jail, and we will make a point and highlight it in the media, because banks and speculators pay millions of dollars for PR, for good public relations. So the minute we can get them into the news is through those vigils, those marches, those blockades is the best tactic, because that's when they're going to come to the table and start negotiating.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah. One more minute left before we go to the next round of speakers, and then we'll have some more Q&A time.
Okay.
I have an example. When that pandemic started almost a year ago, housing court was still open, and we still see a lot of our folks were getting evicted. So immediately what we did, we took action. We call everybody, you know, to make sense of it. Why? We do understand that folks should not be too close to each other. And why is the housing code open, actively evicting folks in the time of the pandemic? So when we had a bunch of folks at the housing code, you know, basically shutting that housing code, within 2 weeks, our governor had a change of heart and said, well, maybe we should suspend everything. The judges called also. But if we did not do that action, if we did not go on the news to show that level of inequality in our communities, I don't think, I cannot say I don't think, but maybe we would have seen them having that kind of change heart much later in the game. So in a way, we save
Okay.
lives.
I'm going to take this one next question and then we'll stop because we have to move to the next section. What are the plans or thoughts on making rent control happen again statewide? Rent control happen statewide. Anyone want to take that question?
So we need to build out a powerful housing movement. How it was deemed illegal in the 90s is, you know, places like Western Mass. We haven't had a tenant organization since the 1970s. So really building out housing justice organizations like, replicated like City Life in Springfield, No One Leaves, Lynn United for Change across the state is what's going to build that momentum to actually win rent control.
Okay,
Again,
excellent.
real change comes from the movement. It comes from the people. So if we're going to change the rent control laws in Massachusetts, it has to come from the people most directly impacted.
Okay, excellent. Anyone else? And then we'll move on to the next section. Ronel or Annie?
Actually, I tell folks, so we should support HD 3030 that bill we have out. It starts there. If we able to pass that, then we could talk about rent control. Unless we can entertain that folks should not be evicted until after a year that pandemic is over, or we basically playing the game of the big realtors, because they have that kind of money. They can wait, they can sustain, but our communities can't. We need the help, not a week from now, not 2 years from now, right now, because folks are dying. Folks need the money, they need the help, they need solution, they need HD 3030.
Okay, if we could talk a little bit more about HD 3030 after we move on to the next portion, that would be great. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Vaughn, and great questions. Our next panelist is Zevon Sobrino Wheeler, a Cambridge City Councilor involved in community organizing to make Cambridge and our region more just, equitable, and resilient. He's been involved in campaigns to support residents who face eviction, steep increases in rent, and poor living conditions like mold, lack of heat, and flooding. His campaign is built on the idea that Cambridge doesn't have to wait on the federal or state government to improve to start confronting the social and political crises of our time. Housing justice, climate justice, and he's speaking about the 5 interlocking injustices here: climate change and racial, gender, and economic equity. Instead, we should lead the way in tackling them, he says, and become a city that others look to as an example of what they can accomplish by acting boldly. Thank you for being here, and the floor is yours, Yvonne.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me. I'm Jeevan Sobrino Wheeler, Cambridge City Councilor and co-chair of the Housing Committee. It's my first term on the council here. The point that Rose raised of real change coming from movements, I think, is a really good place to start, because so much of my work as first term elected is figuring out how to support that organizing and figuring out how to support those movements. I got to be involved with some of the organizing of City Life, Vida Urbana, and Tenants Union's works in Hyde Park before starting on the council. And one of the first big Tenants Union's events at the Stony Brook Tenant Union that I got to help be a part of, there was a speaker from Fairlawn there speaking at that event that I think got people energized, got people to see how it's possible, and that organizing, that movement building really builds on itself, and that's how we're going to make change at the policy level and the elected level and beyond that too. And one of the things that I think has been good to see come out of the pandemic is, as everybody's stuck in our houses, people are connecting with their neighbors, are doing mutual aid organizing, doing housing organizing, and I hope we see that momentum continue after the pandemic. From a policy level, from a elected level, I think the pieces I see, there's responding to the particular housing crisis tied to the pandemic, and then there's addressing the housing crisis that was here with us before the pandemic and is going to be here with us after. On the pandemic side, it's really highlighted that housing is a public health issue. We knew that before, but it's particularly relevant with COVID, because if you don't have housing, you can't social distance, and that's places we've seen large spikes in COVID are also the places that are dealing with acute housing crises. The things that we've done on the elected level that we need to keep doing, the eviction ban, which we've touched on a little, has been was incredibly helpful. And another piece we're working on here is non-congregate shelter for unhoused residents. Cities like Boston have done a bit of it. We've been pushing hard to get our city manager to do more in Cambridge of uncrowded shelters. Folks who don't have housing, there's just not a good way to social distance if you don't have a space of your own. And then there's the piece of addressing the housing crisis that was here with us even before the pandemic. Cambridge is a huge example of it. I think throughout Massachusetts, throughout the Boston metro, everyone is experiencing this. In Cambridge, the one-bedroom median apartment rent is $2,500 a month. The median cost to buy a one-bedroom condo is $750,000. It's just out of the price of most people, unless you and your partner are making six figures, or you have you can inherit housing from someone. And our local public housing authority has a wait list with 20,000 people on it. So we know the crisis is really acute, and how we address it, and at least in my mind, is getting tenant protections like rent control in our cities and towns, and then it's expanding the amount of affordable public social housing for folks. Those tenant protections, rent control is huge. It's been banned in Massachusetts throughout since 1994. Cambridge was one of the cities that had it right up until the ban, and residents of Cambridge voted overwhelmingly to keep it. We just got overwhelmingly voted by people in the rest of the state just narrowly, and it's time to bring it back. Just cause eviction, tenant opportunity to purchase. There's a bill in the legislature right now that would let tenants buy their building when it goes on the market. They would have the first opportunity to buy it, or they could donate that right to an affordable housing nonprofit. And that's so many of the times where we start seeing housing struggles is when a building gets sold and rents get jacked up, or folks start getting pushed out. And so tenant opportunity to purchase, TOPA, would be huge. There's a coalition working on it right now. And it's all of these things that cities so often are banned from doing by the state government. In Massachusetts, which is really frustrating. There are cities in places like California that can enact these things on their own, but in Massachusetts, so many of these tools have been taken out of the hands of towns and cities, and we need to put these tools back in our toolbox. And I think the second part is, we need more affordable housing, and there's a few different parts to that. Tenant protections are absolutely huge, because otherwise, I think we talk a lot about, creating affordable housing, building affordable housing, but we don't want to end up in a dichotomy where you get affordable housing and you have these protections, or you're left in market rate housing and you're sort of left to fend for yourself on the free market. And that's why tenant protections are so important. But we've also got to be figuring out how to spend more on affordable housing, and communities like Cambridge that are doing well off relatively financially, figuring out how to harness the biotech boom, the development boom in places like Kendall Square, and pour that into affordable housing to make sure that we have development without displacement, which we've not done a great job of in Cambridge. And then we've got to figure out how to make it easier to create affordable housing by ending exclusionary zoning. And that's true especially in sort of wealthier communities that have, as my colleague Raul Fernandez, who's on the Brookline Select Board, says, there's communities that have been redlined, and then there's communities that have benefited financially from redlining, right? For every community that's had that imposed on them, there's our communities that have been exclusionary historically, and we need to work to undo that exclusion. And then I think the last part is figuring out new means of creating affordable housing. There's a couple nonprofits in Cambridge. We need more public and social housing and funding. And then we need to look at things like community land trusts. I had a meeting about starting a Cambridge Community Land Trust in the past couple weeks about figuring out how to do creative community control on affordable housing. And there's been amazing works from groups like D&I with CLTs in Boston and places like Burlington, Vermont. It's a tool we can do more of throughout Massachusetts.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Mike Conley, Massachusetts State Representative from 26 Middlesex. State Representative Mike Conley is a community organizer, renter, and proud progressive, serving his third term representing Cambridge and Somerville in the Massachusetts House. His commitment to social and economic justice stems from his background. He was raised in public housing by a single mother. Now on Beacon Hill, he is fighting to affirm housing as a human right, for a fair and equitable taxation scheme where large corporations and wealthy individuals pay their fair share, and for a robust social safety net during and after the pandemic. Welcome, Mike.
Well, thank you so much, Savina, and thank you all for being here. It's really an honor to be among such an esteemed group of organizers and advocates and activists. And I'm proud to say when the Poor People's Campaign did its very first event at Beacon Hill, we were actually in a legislative session, and during a recess, I ran outside just to stand there in the street with you when you launched the Poor People's Campaign in Massachusetts, because this is really what we need. You know, the plight of poor people, the plight of people of color, the immigrant community, it has been marginalized. And despite the fact that there may be a lot of kind words spoken to people's concerns on Beacon Hill, the reality is that we are in an ongoing affordable housing emergency. The city of Cambridge, where I live, declared an affordable housing emergency all the way back in the year 1998. And since that time, all we have witnessed is the continued displacement of people of color, of immigrants, of the working class, as investment capital from all over the world pours into our neighborhoods, redevelops properties, and pushes the people out who actually have made this community what it is. And so, you know, these are some of the concerns as someone who was raised in public housing, as someone who has been a lifelong renter in this real estate market. These are some of the concerns that I bring to my advocacy on Beacon Hill. You know, you think about what I think we need to advocate for, and the legislation we've heard a little bit about tonight, I think it's House Bill 3030, is incredibly important. And more broadly, I think we really need to put the goal of housing for all on the table. We have so many people doing so much work, and there are so many coalitions that are organizing around individual issues, and I'll try to get to a bunch of them in the next couple of minutes. But at the end of the day, we all have to be working together to demand that housing truly is a human right, and this is something that we can do. You know, last session was my second session on Beacon Hill, and I actually introduced a Housing for All agenda. The centerpiece of the Housing for All agenda was a bill called the Tenant Protection Act that lifts the statewide ban on rent control. And I filed that bill in partnership with people like State Rep Nika Aligardo and in collaboration with groups like City Life. We actually had a great deal of success with that bill. It was voted on favorably by the Housing Committee on Beacon Hill, which honestly is the most progress that we've seen on rent control in 25 years. And we weren't alone. States like Oregon, California, and New York have actually gone even further. They've passed into law strong rent regulation provisions. So we need to continue to ensure that nobody gets evicted. We need to go look toward actually canceling people's debts. People who have lost a job, who have faced either financial or medical hardship, they shouldn't be saddled with debt. They shouldn't be worried about eviction when the different moratoria come to an end. Another big thing we need to do, and I'll try to keep this to about one more minute because I'm sure we want to get to questions. Another big thing we have to talk about is money. We have to tax the rich. We have to tax big corporations. We can do that here in Massachusetts. And in Washington, D.C., they need to tax the rich, tax big corporations, and cut the military budget, right? And, you know, to put this in perspective for you, let me share a couple quick thoughts. MRVP is the state's leading housing voucher program. It's sort of our flagship housing voucher program. 30 years ago, we funded 20,000 housing vouchers. Today, 30 years later, our leading voucher program funds 9,000 housing vouchers. That is austerity. That's what that is. It's happening in Massachusetts, and it's happening while the rich are getting richer and while the world's largest corporations are in our backyard making themselves richer. We are seeing, and what is the result? The result is that family homelessness has doubled in the last 10 years. And think about what that means. These past 10 years, again, investment capital from all over the world has poured into our communities. People's property values and real estate developers' profits have gone through the roof. And what is the result for poor people? What is the result for communities of color and for immigrant communities? We know the stats tell us it's displacement, it's disproportionate incidence of homelessness. So we have the solutions, and I'm going to put a bunch of bills in the chat. We have the solutions. We do need, as others have said, we need to continue organizing. We have to keep our eyes on that goal of housing for all, and we have to demand that all of my colleagues on Beacon Hill join with us in a movement to say housing truly is a human right. We truly can do it. So I guess that's, if you give me 5 minutes, that's the best I got, but I could go on for 24 hours, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Mike. We appreciate your words and your call. And that is a call to action. All across the country, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, along with our partners and other housing organizations, have been organizing from the ground up for many, many years, right? The National Union of the Homeless came out of the housing takeovers. In the 80s, I was a part of that. And in 2019, we reestablished the National Union of the Homeless. And I think a lot of you on this call have heard. We must continue to organize from the bottom up. We must continue in the face of neoliberalism, right? Continue to fight poverty and not the poor, and tax the rich, and stay in the face of the politicians who continue to perpetuate homelessness and policy violence. In the richest country in the world, no one should be sleeping in the bus stations, in the subway station, on grates, right? In abandoned buildings, freezing and dying and burning to death, trying to stay warm. We shouldn't have a mass and cast methadone mile where people are overdosing. This is the most visible expression of homelessness, and we are calling everyone, all hands on deck, as we used to say in the military, all hands on deck. We are witnessing a war on the poor, an epidemic that we had before the pandemic. So thank you so much for all of your words, and we're going to move now into the questions and answers and have the call to action after that. So thank you all very much.
All right, delighted to be back. Thank you again, Savina. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Javon. Javon, question that has come and that you may have answered it. You know, what is happening in Cambridge to make housing more affordable? What is happening in Cambridge to make housing more affordable? That is the question.
I talked briefly about community land trust. We just had an event about starting one in Cambridge in the past couple of weeks. And for folks who aren't familiar, Cambridge Community Land Trust, it's a affordable housing organization, and it really addresses the issue of why housing is so expensive. And a big part of that is the land cost. It's not that houses have got twice as nice in the past 10 years, that they're a lot more expensive, or that they have a big new deck. It's that places like Cambridge, like Boston, like so many of our communities have become a lot more desirable places to live because of the biotech boom, because of universities, and that's driven the cost up. And so with a community land trust, a CLT, you can rent a house or buy a house and build equity, but the land remains with the community through the CLT. And so the housing prices can go up, but not double or 100%. It has to remain affordable for the next generation. So that is a tool. And then we're trying to raise more revenue for public and social housing through things like the transfer fee that I saw Ellen Schachter dropped in the chat, taxing or putting a fee on property sales above $1 million or $2 million, depending on what the state ends up passing. and 2% of that would go towards affordable housing, which would generate tens of millions of dollars per year in places like Cambridge for affordable housing. We need to do more with the linkage fee that taxes commercial development and puts a part of that fee towards affordable housing and to jobs programs as well. And then places like Cambridge and Boston especially that have universities with multi-billion-dollar endowments, we've got to do more with pilots and with making pilots mandatory. There's a bill in the legislature about that right now, because these universities and hospitals in some cases too don't have to pay property taxes. And they have, Harvard has a $40 billion endowment and they don't pay property on some of the best land in Cambridge. That's money we've got to be putting towards affordable housing. So those are a few of the things we're working on here at least. And I'm really glad to have folks like, Rep. Connolly and the state legislature putting to put some of these tools like rent control back in our hands as well.
Okay, a question came up about the Massachusetts eviction moratorium. Where are we with that at this current time? Mike?
Sure. Well, we did have, and by the way, normally I was trying to go quick. Normally I'd say nice things about Jeevan. So I need to say nice things about Jeevan. It has been awesome having Jeevan on the city council. Thank you for being a total ally and a comrade. Anyways, so we did have, and again, we shouldn't lose sight of the victory. I think collectively, and it's many people in this room, we had the nation's strongest eviction moratorium for 6 months. Unfortunately, Charlie Baker has a lot of maneuvers that he can make, and he is totally in partnership with the real estate industry, unfortunately, and he maneuvered around the movement. And we are currently in a state where we do have a lot of additional resources around programs like RAFT, and we have worked very diligently to get some targeted changes to the eviction process that give vulnerable tenants a fighting chance to actually qualify for those RAFT funds and work out stabilizations with their landlord. But in terms of the eviction moratorium, we're currently relying on the federal provisions, which, as I understand it, were extended out for several more months. So we're in an okay place, but it is not sufficient. There are still people being evicted. There are still people grappling with their back debt. And so we do need to organize, to come together, and to have a sustained push to make this value that housing is a human right translate into reality as we hopefully come out of this pandemic. So to answer your question, we have the CDC stuff and we have some expanded state programs, but certainly the legislation that has been discussed a little earlier here, the preventing COVID-19 evictions and foreclosures, that would be amazingly helpful as we hopefully again get housing for all to be a reality.
Okay, I'm going to move on to this question. The question was asked about your luxury tax. Could you explain that a little bit more, Mike?
Sure. So, this is a bill. Ellen Schechter is on the line here, and Ellen has been a real leader in the drafting and organizing effort of this bill. And so this is Bill HD 1911. I have actually filed transfer fee bills all 3 terms I've been up there. Both of my first terms, we actually moved transfer fee through committee process favorably. So I'm hopeful that this session, with more momentum coming from Cambridge and other places, we can get this particular bill hopefully over the finish line. And what it would do is just enable a city or town to come up with their own scheme for having a small real estate transfer fee. And it's very flexible. So, we're not looking to target owner occupants of, duplexes or anything like that. But it would allow you to do a fee up to 2% on real estate transfers. I don't know if Ellen wants to say more, if we should invite her to do that.
Ellen, would you like to say something in reference to that?
I guess the only thing, Sure. Hi, everybody. Ellen Schachter. Thanks, Mike and Javon, for the shout out on this. I think the only thing I would say, which I think is so important, is that we really built this bill so that it can work in every kind of city in the Commonwealth, because there's some bills that would only help like a wealthy Boston or a wealthy Cambridge for that matter. And we're really fighting for something that can be a tool in Springfield and in Lynn and in the Gateway communities so that those communities can also raise funds. And I would just say Lee Ferris put the bill, put our realestatetransferfee.org in the chat box. And if anybody's interested, please go on there. We need organizations to sign on to be our organizational sponsors, and we need your help. So that's all I would add. And thanks to Mike and Javon for their leadership on this, and to all the organizers here for their leadership on this bill as well.
This is a question to both Mike and Javon. And then if there's another section for us to go into, because we only have about 7 minutes, to what extent do linkage fees counter the low income housing tax credits that our cities give developers? Again, to what extent do linkage fees counter the low income housing tax credits that our cities give developers? Mike and Javon.
Could I go first, or
Sure.
I certainly want to hear from Javon because he's the city councilor, so I don't want to step on his toes. But I do have a point that an axe that I've been grinding, and it relates to linkage fees, and that is and I'm sorry to say it, but the official policy of the city of Cambridge is displacement when you look at our linkage fee, and that's because our linkage fee is based on an analysis that looks at what is the impact of new commercial development, offices, and lab space? What does that have on the affordability of existing housing? And our city does that analysis. And by the way, they did this before Javon got here, so don't blame Javon. But they do that analysis and they say, okay, for every new square foot of commercial real estate, there's going to be, let's just say, a $45 impact. Then they say, but add up all of the state and federal affordable housing programs that we have in our city, take that value, subtract it from that impact, and then they get a number, and then they say that number is too high, and they discount that number. And so all I wanted to say, and sorry to step on your toes, Javon, is in my mind, that means that logically, it's the policy here to draw on scarce state and federal funding to subsidize the impact of commercial development. And when you say it like that, I don't think it sounds that good. And by the way, we have great linkage fee policies. A lot of cities around the state have to catch up to us. But sorry to step on your toes, Javon. Let me kick it to Jeevan.
No worries. Yeah, this is something I could talk about for a while, and we'll try not to take up more than a minute or two, but I think Mike's completely right. The big thing of when you look at cities like Cambridge especially, have used commercial development and really juicing it without providing enough mandatory affordable housing, without having a high enough linkage fee, and have used that development to keep property taxes low. And at the same time, what that does when you add tons of new commercial development and not housing and not affordable housing is that you keep property taxes low, but you also drive up rents and drive up housing costs. So that's the trade-off that's been made in planning in Cambridge. I think it's true in places like Boston, so many suburbs as well, that it's that, who are we thinking about here? And we've seen displacement, thousands of residents being displaced in the past 10 years, 20 years, 30 years since rent control was repealed. But we haven't, really addressed that with affordable housing and by bringing these tenant protections back to the table.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. And now it's time for our call to action. You're going to copy the link that I believe Cynthia is going to drop in the chat, and then you'll call your elected officials. So on behalf of the 140 million poor and low income people in the country, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, and our 45 state coordinating committees, thousands of religious leaders, scholars, economists, advocates, and hundreds of supporting organizations. This past Memorial Monday, March 15th, we delivered our 14 policies to heal the nation to governors, members of state legislature, and the US Congress. On March 15, 2021, we had placed the priorities on the doors of the state capitals and in the hands of legislatures all across this nation. So let your elected officials, elected representatives know that you support policies that will heal the nation and fight against the interlocking injustices of systemic poverty, ecological devastation, and lack of health care, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism. To read the entire 14 policy priorities, there is a bit.ly that you can click on and also send it to your legislatures. We are asking all of you who are interested in joining the Poor People's Campaign, whether it's in Fall River, whether it's in Holyoke, or whether it's on Cape Ann, to start a committee, a coordinating committee in your town. Please attend our bi-weekly statewide meetings, and we can make sure that you have all the digital materials you need, the toolkits and resources you need to start a chapter or an arm of the Poor People's Campaign in Massachusetts. Again, all hands on deck. I'd like to thank the Cambridge Housing Alliance, all of the phenomenal speakers and panelists on tonight, Cynthia and Vaughn, and all of the coordinators who had made this evening possible. And they worked really hard in a short period of time to make tonight happen. So thank you all so much, and we're going to end with Everybody's Got a Right to Live. Feel free and sing and join in. Thank you, everybody. Forward together. Not one step.
Not one step back.
Not one step back.
Not one step
Step
back.
back.
One step back.
Peace.
Step back. Woo! Right.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Okay, good night, all.
Good night, all. Good night. Good work.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Yes. Great work.